The defense rests its case in the murder trial of Jacob Vanbergen, and today centered on testimony from one witness. Here's 7 News reporter Chad Charette.
25-year-old Jacob Vanbergen stands accused of fatally strangling his friend and employer, 39-year-old Brandon Shepker, at the Ridgeview Lodge just outside of Lowville early last year. Both men from Pennsylvania were looking at properties in the area. The final and only witness brought to the stand Wednesday was Dr. Kent Arshbarger. Last September, Arshbarger was contracted by Vanbergen's defense team to review the cause and manner of Shepker's death based on information and photos provided to him by a forensic pathologist. Arshbarger concluded that strangulation was the most likely cause of death for Shepker, citing neck abrasions and other marks. After a line of questioning by defense attorney Gary Miles, however, he did acknowledge that the presence of alcohol and the opioid tramadol in Shepker's system could have contributed to his death. In his opinion, that death was still ultimately the result of strangulation. Following a cross-examination by the prosecution, Arshbarger left the stand. The defense then rested its case after admitting a banknote as evidence. In the interest of allotting enough time to the process, Judge Daniel King decided to let the jury go on break around noon. The jury will be charged Friday morning and will begin deliberations shortly thereafter. Legal proceedings are expected to continue through 6 p.m. that day. Chad Charette, 7 News.